It's time to read your Bible. So shut your yapper and listen up.
Good morning and welcome to Remarkably Uncomfortable Bible Story Day. We're in Genesis 16 and 17, and there's some sensitive things that we're going to talk about today, so maybe we'll gloss over some of them. We can talk about them more when I get home. So Genesis 16, this is a story of Hagar and Ishmael. And so in the beginning of it, Genesis 16 says, Now Sarah, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, but she had an Egyptian maidservant named Hagar. So she said to Abram, The Lord has kept me from having children. Go sleep with my maidservant. Perhaps I can build a family through her. So notice first of all that it's Sarah's idea for Abraham to sleep with Hagar. And Hagar is Sarah's maidservant. Notice that she is Egyptian. This may have been one of the servants that Abraham got when Sarah was in the Pharaoh's harem, that she was given a maidservant to help her in the harem, and now she stayed with her all this time. So notice, again, some of the decisions that Abraham made years before are coming back to haunt him now. And so Sarah says to sleep with Hagar, and that child will count as hers. That was common in those days, and we see it later on, also in the case of Jacob and his wives. They do the same practice. If a woman could not have children, then one of her servants could have children, and that would count as her child. The reason that's so important is because a woman's job in the ancient world was to have children. That was why men got married, was for their wives to have kids. So if you couldn't do that, you were seen as a failure of a wife and probably cursed by God in some way. So this is not just Sarah wants a child, it's like seen as her responsibility, and she's unable to do that. And so by using a servant, she could fulfill her responsibilities and lose her shame that way, which of course doesn't work out that way for Sarah, but so that's kind of the purpose of Abraham sleeping with Hagar, is to help Sarah. So Abraham agrees and sleeps with Hagar, and she gets pregnant right away. That creates some problems because, first of all, if a couple's not having kids, no one's exactly sure why that is. Could be the man, could be the woman. But as soon as Abraham and Hagar have a kid, then the fault seems to lie just on Sarah. First of all, notice that Hagar and Abraham, it's not just Sarah's servant. Hagar is also Abraham's wife. She's his concubine. And we don't really have a term for concubine in our society. A concubine is kind of like a minor wife. Wives in those days had certain responsibilities and rights. But a concubine did not, but they still lived with the husband, and the husband took care of them. But their children basically could not inherit from the husband and things like that. So they were kind of considered like more like property more than a wife might be. We use the term almost wife or half wife to talk about concubines. We don't really have a situation that's like that in our society. So first of all, it is not accurate to say that Abraham slept with just a servant. He slept with one of his wives. No, she was a servant before that, but she becomes one of his wives, first of all. So he's not committing adultery here, at least not in a technical sense. But once Hagar becomes pregnant, it says she begins to despise Sarah. And I think we can understand what's happening here if once again we think of Abraham as being like a king. Remember, he has all these people under him, and Sarah's one of his wives, the main wife, the queen, but she can't have any kids, and so Abraham takes another wife, and she all of a sudden has a prince. I think you can see why Hagar might start to think she's better than the queen, that now maybe she should be the queen and ruling the household. And it is true in the ancient world that, or even in the medieval world, that when kings had more than one wife and they had a harem like that, that there would be a lot of infighting and intrigue in the harem as different wives tried to either make their children more rise up in the household or try to make themselves the queen. And that's kind of what happens here. Hagar is working to become like the head wife so she can become the queen. And she starts to kind of look down on Sarah, and who knows exactly what she said, but basically starts to think she's better than Sarah. And so Sarah, being the queen, does have the right to punish Hagar as one of her servants, and she starts to abuse her. We don't know exactly what she did. It seems a little unlikely it would be physical abuse, because Sarah wants Hagar to have that child, because that child will count as Sarah's. And so she's not going to hurt her too much when she's pregnant, but abuses her enough that Hagar flees and she runs away. And the angel of the Lord appeared to her. And again, this angel of the Lord appears. We have this same situation that no one's exactly sure who that is. Some people think it was basically Jesus appearing to her and talking to her. Other people think it was Gabriel, or maybe some other angel that's speaking for God, that appears and talks to Hagar and says, where are you going? And she says, well, I'm running away from Sarah, but she doesn't know exactly where she's going yet, so she's pretty much just running. Probably good guess that she's returning to Egypt. If she's going to run away, she's probably going to head back down to Egypt. But the angel of the Lord appears and says, no, go back to Sarah, and that's where you're supposed to be now. And he says, the angel says, you will have many children, just like Sarah is going to, and you're going to have many descendants. It does say that Ishmael will live in the wild and be kind of warlike and have a lot of struggles. It says he will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. He will live in hostility towards all his brothers. Some people still see a fulfillment in this. Many Arabic people trace their lineage through Ishmael. They believe that they are descended directly from Ishmael, and that's where all the tribes in Arabia came from, for example, in Muhammad's day, and still today. And so some people believe that Arab people will always be at war. Personally, I'm not sure that those curses or those descriptions last all that long. And certainly it seems to be in biblical times, but that doesn't mean that Christ can't redeem that time, and bring it back to a peaceful time for Arab people. So I don't know. We'll see. So Hagar returns to Sarah a little bit later on. Now we're on to chapter 17. It says, when Abraham was 99, God appeared to him again. Ishmael was born when Abraham was 86. So now Ishmael is probably 13 or 14 years old. So just going from chapter 16 to 17, we skip over about 15 years there. And for the second uncomfortable story today, God institutes the ritual of circumcision, which I think I will talk to you about in person rather than put on a video. But it's to mark Abraham's family as set apart to God. Now other people practiced it in that area later on, but generally speaking, only the Jewish people practiced circumcision for a while. That's what marked them as Jewish people, and you'll see that term come up in the New Testament. Jewish people still talked about barbarians and non-believers as uncircumcised. So I always like to share with the students, imagine that you're Ishmael and he's 13 or 14 years old, and your dad comes up to you and says, hey, God spoke to me yesterday, and guess what we're going to do today? And obviously all the men in Abraham's household, it says in verse 26, Abraham and his son Ishmael were both circumcised on that same day, and every male in Abraham's household, including those born in his household or bought from a foreigner, was circumcised with him. So all these few hundred men were all circumcised because the king said so. So sometimes having Abraham for a king was a good thing, and sometimes maybe not so much. Today, just about every male in the Western world is circumcised. So it's not as religious as it once was, but what people are seeing is that there are some religions that are actively saying they do not want their children circumcised anymore to separate them from the West. So in chapter 16 and 17, we see the story of Hagar and Ishmael being born, and then also the institution of circumcision being introduced. So that's it for today, and we'll see you tomorrow. Ishmael is born, and we see the institution of circumcision introduced to the Bible. And so we see, and so that's going to be chapter 16 and 17 today. We see the story of Ishmael conceived and born, and also the institution of circumcision introduced. And also